the International Day of Play will be an opportunity for IPA World, along with all of our corporate partners and other NGOs, to celebrate play. This year, IPA World has invited the authors of the Canadian Paediatric Society statement on risky play to speak with us and share their work on this important document that has a global influence on how we view risky play.
Thank you, Robin, for that warm welcome. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Like Robin mentioned, my name is Dr. Louise de Lannoy. I'm the Executive Director of Outdoor Play Canada. I'll be moderating today's session, coming to you today from the unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Like Robin mentioned, the Canadian Paediatric Society, or CPS as we may be referring to it in today's webinar, recently released a position statement on outdoor risky play, urging members to add risky play to their clinical toolbox to help manage many of the common challenges they see in clinical practice, including obesity, anxiety, and behavioral issues. The statement recognizes that risky play is essential to children's development and their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So in today's webinar, what we aim to do is explore what exactly this position statement means for Canadian children and their families. Like I mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Outdoor Play Canada, which is a national not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting, protecting, and preserving outdoor play and nature and the outdoors for all people living in Canada. We say all people because we feel that play doesn't end when you stop being a child. And with that, I will turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Suzanne Beno.
Hi, Louise. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's what an honor to be here and part of this panel. My name is Suzanne Beno. I'm a pediatric emergency physician at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, Ontario. And I also co-direct the trauma program at that hospital. And I am the chair of the Injury Prevention Committee for the Canadian Paediatric Society. Emilie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. My name is Emilie Beaulieu. I'm a general pediatrician and a clinician scientist at Laval University, so in Quebec City, and the homeland of the Huron-Wendat Nation. And so I'm a member of the CPS Injury Prevention Committee as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pamela Fuselli. I'm the president and CEO at Parachute. Parachute is Canada's national charity dedicated to preventable injuries. When you think about things like motor vehicle crashes, falls, poisoning, concussion, which are a leading cause of death. And that's a surprise to most people. You might think that injury prevention and encouraging risky play don't go together, but they do. And that's my role here today. So I am a member of the Canadian Paediatric Society's Injury Prevention Committee as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm the last panel member. I'm Mariana Brussoni. I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia in the Faculty of Medicine and director of the Human Early Learning Partnership. And I've been doing risky play research for many years now, coming at it from an injury prevention perspective. So I was absolutely thrilled when Emilie and Suzanne reached out to let us know that the position statement was in the works. And we're so excited to share it with you all and to be able to hopefully inspire some international efforts in a similar direction. I look forward to the conversation, and I join you today from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver.
Thank you, everyone. I believe Robin mentioned we'll be taking questions at the end, but we encourage if you have any questions throughout, just to add them to the chat. We'll aim to get to as many as possible. I guess to get us started off, we thought, first of all, it would be helpful to tell the audience a little bit about what exactly is the CPS statement on risky outdoor play. What does it mean to have to publish a statement, and why within the CPS, the Canadian Paediatric Society, why was there the need to create such a document? Dr. Beno or Dr. Beaulieu, would either of you like to take this question or get us started?
You go ahead, Emilie. I can fill in.
Thanks. Okay, so CPS statement is, an official statement released by the Canadian Paediatric Society, and it was written as we said, by this injury prevention committee. So really the intent behind this statement was to, first of all, summarize the concept of risky play, make sure that all pediatrician members knew about it, understood the benefits. We reviewed in this statement, the nuances around the assessment that needs to be done between the benefits and the risk. We discussed a bit if there are any research around, medical context that would change if risky play applies or not to a specific child. And most importantly, we wanted the pediatrician to, think of risky play as what we call something to add in their toolbox. Being, aware of the obesity, anxiety epidemics that we see in Canada, and I guess in many other countries. A lot of behavioral issues also mentioned by our schools. And so we thought that risky play was really something great to discuss with parents and to apply in the kids' life to try to prevent these health problems that we often see in practice. I don't know, Suzanne, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, that's great. I would, the only other thing I would add is that we're just really impressed with the work, the research and the advocacy that child psychologists like Dr. Brussoni and Dr. Sansider are on the call, and other work that's been done through play organizations, that the statement was an opportunity to endorse that work and to disseminate that knowledge out to, pediatricians who may not be actually as familiar, interestingly enough, with that work. And, we have such a close direct role with children and with families, and so this was a good and positive step, I think, in knowledge dissemination.
Thank you for that. The next building block question was, what is risky play? And I'm hoping someone will feel comfortable taking that question on, given that Dr. Sansider is in the room with us today. Mariana or Pamela, would you like to take that on?
Oh, I will definitely defer to Mariana.
Well, I can see Elinbeth has got her camera up, so I feel like we should pass it over to her, but I'll do my best to represent the amazing amount of work that she has done to lay this strong foundation for the rest of us to climb on her shoulders and do more work. So the official academic definition of risky play is thrilling and exciting forms of play where there's a chance of physical injury and children are engaging with uncertainty. And so it's, each aspect of that definition is quite important. You've got the thrill and the excitement, and Ellen talks in her PhD research about the scary, funny feeling that kids get in their tummies, when they're pushing themselves past their typical limits. The engaging with uncertainty, so understanding that they're taking risks. They don't know what's going to happen. Could be positive, could be negative. And that's part of the point. And I think that's also part of what makes adults who are watching this kind of play the most nervous. And then the chance of physical injury. So, you know, anytime you're moving your body, there is a chance of physical injury, as Pamela will tell us. And so when you're taking risks, of course there is. But some of the work that we've been doing in my lab is actually, you know, digging into what actually is the chance of physical injury and how do we balance that with some of the other stuff. So the only other thing I would add, and just first of all, that some examples of risky play that Ellen and others' research has shown us is things like climbing high in trees, you know, a rollicking game of tag, play fighting, those sorts of things. And I would also urge us to understand that it's not up to adults watching the play to decide whether it's risky or not. It's really in the child, and children, you know, even at the same age and developmental stage, are going to show very different levels of risky play depending on their comfort level and what they like to do and how far they can push themselves and what's available in the environment and so on. So Ellen, I'm hoping that I've done justice to your beautiful work. Thumbs up. Awesome.
Thank you for that, Mariana. I wonder, could you also speak a little bit to, I know you've often talked about, you know, why the phrase risky play, like why did we start actually using that phrase and felt the need to use it instead of something like adventurous play that feels a little more comfortable?
Yeah, this is a conversation that comes up again and again and hasn't really gone away over the years. And in fact, different people in different countries have dealt with it in different ways. So speaking to the situation in Canada, and when I picked up Ellen's research and why I felt it was so important to keep intact that word, was because risk, especially in injury prevention, certainly we used to equate it with danger or hazard. So it was seen as a negative thing and something to be avoided kind of at all costs. And so we were trying to design risk out of childhood without necessarily realizing the consequences of that on kids. And the CPS position statement does a beautiful job of kind of summarizing that. And so by just calling it even outdoor play or adventurous play or challenging play, that made it easier to brush what we were really challenged by under the carpet. So, you know, everybody can get behind, yeah, outdoor play, great, adventure play, great. But it wasn't dealing with head on the fact that kids were increasingly restricted in the risks that they were allowed to take. And so in those early conversations when we were, you know, sitting around a table writing the very original position statement in 2015, the position statement on outdoor active play that was put out by many of us, and including the precursor to Outdoor Play Canada, we really felt strongly that the risk and risky should remain, just so that we could, at the societal level, tackle that conversation around risk and the potential positive and negative aspects of it. Now, having said that, I'm also very pragmatic, and I understand that you need to meet your audience where they're at. So often, even in conversations that I have, say with parents or municipalities or teachers or whatever, I realize that by jumping straight into risky play, I could shut things down. And so I do, in certain circumstances, temper my language so that we can, you know, slowly move people along. But when we're talking academically in academic papers, or when we're talking on the societal level conversation, we really kind of take a hard nose on keeping that aspect of risk intact.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And something that I find is often helpful when talking to friends, family, is the idea that the type of play we're talking about is often the type of play that has disappeared from children's lives. So it's the type of play that used to exist, 20, 30 years ago, but is disappearing from children's lives today. So we're not trying to introduce a new type of play. It's identifying the fact that children's play has become a lot more restrictive, a lot perhaps potentially too bubble wrapped, and there are negative consequences to their physical, mental, and overall health and well-being. Apologies, I'm in a cabin and there's There are a few mosquitoes buzzing around, so I might be gently swatting, trying not to kill them. And so I think, this conversation also always leads to then what is not risky play, and how does that come into play in terms of its relationship to injury? Pam, maybe would you like to jump in there?
Sure. And I think the conversation and the point that you just made about when we talk about risky play and we start to give examples, a lot of us just think back and think, it's what I did when I was a kid. That was just going out and playing. And so I think that's important, because in some of the conversations that I've had with parents and public health and municipalities is that, we don't want to put kids at risk of serious injury. And I think, we don't want to prevent every injury, even in older people, older adults. We want to prevent the serious and the ones that cause fatalities. And so, when you think about risk in your daily life, if you think about yourself, doing what you do on a daily basis, driving in your car, walking on the street, those types of things, swimming in a pool, all of those involve some level of risk. And so by situating it in that kind of a scenario and sort of highlighting those examples, I think it gives parents a little bit more comfort in terms of, they're not putting I often use this example, you wouldn't put your 6-year-old behind the wheel of a car because they need to learn how to drive the car. You do it at a certain level. And so understanding, and I think we'll get into this, the difference between a risk and a hazard, it changes as well over time. Mariana alluded to the ability, the comfort level of the child, their coordination. That's what parents know best. And so, I'd love to be able to give a parent an age where it's like before 9, you can do this, and after 9, you can do that. But it doesn't work that easily. And so assessing what every child's, abilities are and letting them be involved with those decisions, because they will attune themselves to that tickle in their tummy as to, what they can or are comfortable doing. And so, we want to prevent those serious injuries. Luckily, they don't happen that often in play. And we've engineered out some of those hazards, with, sizing of bars and don't put a drawstring or don't use a drawstring piece of clothing while you're on the playground, and those things where we did see very serious injuries and death. But when we're talking about this kind of play, it's so important to balance. And I think that's the main message.
My computer froze just for a moment there, but thank you so much for that, Pam. You said we'll probably get into that eventually, but I think, let's get into that now. So the differences between hazard and risk, injury, what's an acceptable level of injury, what is a serious injury? I think these are all questions that I'm sure many parents, adults, children themselves potentially think about. Dr. Beno or Dr. Beaulieu, would either of you like to take that question? Talk a little bit about those levels of what is considered a serious injury, what is not considered a serious injury, especially as we relate to children's risky outdoor play.
Yeah, sure. I can try and address that. Yeah, injury risk is a part of life, and children need to recognize that they live in a world of risk and learn how to mitigate it and manage it. And injuries are going to happen. I work in an emergency department, and between 20 and 25% of our visits to an emergency department are injury related. Like you said, most of the time, the significant or severe ones are quite rare, and they really aren't related to play. So we see that in different mechanisms. We see that a lot from traffic, falls from significant height, usually from buildings, or so there, it does happen, but it's not very common. Thank goodness. you know, kids are going to have all kinds of injuries. They have to test themselves. They have to learn their world. And in order to do that, they're going to have some bumps and bruises. So the most common things that we see are head injuries. We see fractures and soft tissue injuries as well. When it comes to play, I would say that those are the three that we generally see. So we see lots of minor head injuries. We see lots of soft tissue injuries, and we see some fractures, sometimes more significant fractures. Certainly, you could also say that maybe, you know, that gradient between what's minor, moderate, or severe is going to be really dependent upon your perception. So while we don't consider, for example, you know, supracondylar fracture, which is a fall that children typically get from falling off monkey bars or play structures, as a life-altering injury or severe injury, that may be severe to parents if it requires surgery and so forth. So there definitely are different perceptions of that for parents, but when it comes to play, I would just say from our experience, it's most of the times minor head injuries, soft tissue injuries, and occasionally some scrapes and broken bones and so forth.
Dr. Beaulieu, Emilie, anything to add?
Yeah, so I guess we can emphasize the difference between a hazard and a risk, because this is something that you know, parents you know, ask a lot of questions about, and it's sometimes difficult to understand the difference in daily life. But a risk would be something that the child can easily recognize, that he feels that, you know, has the control over, whereas a hazard is really something that is beyond the child to be able to recognize. So again, this is really dependent on the developmental stage of the child, his age, any, you know, physical or a mental disability would impact that. And I would also say you need a bit of exposure there also to be able to differentiate a risk from a hazard. So I guess this is something we will come up that will come up with teenagers or you know, older child that has not really experienced risk taking in their earlier years, where perhaps parents and you know, caregivers find that they need to be closer to them in order for the child to be able to realize what the difference is between a risk and a hazard. But I guess this is one of the intent with this statement, as well as that children are exposed quite early, so that right away they can, you know, always still feel this pleasure and thrill in their play, and really be aware of the difference between a risk and a hazard.
Yeah, I think, Mariana, you use a couple of good examples, like concrete examples for parents around, you know, if the piece of equipment is broken, or there's something broken and not functional, or if is glass or needles in the play spaces. I mean, those are definite hazards. They have no play value, right? So, you know, sometimes those examples are easier to, for parents at least, to kind of try to distinguish between that risk and hazard. Mariana, I don't know if you wanted to add to that as well.
I think you guys have done such a beautiful job. It's lovely to hear it played out, and particularly for Dr. Beaulieu and Dr. Beno to share kind of their concrete examples from, you know, the emergency room and what that's like.
Something that I find also always resonates with me every time I hear it is, I hope I don't want to give the statistics because I'm worried I'll get it wrong, but the risk of injury when a child is being transported in a vehicle versus the risk of injury, or the number of injuries as a result of a child being transported in a vehicle versus a child playing outside in a playground. You know, there's quite a distinct difference there, and that's part of it, right? Is recognizing even in a car, a child is exposed to risk, and that risk is actually quite a bit more elevated. So, anyone want to just one of our panelists, would you like to take on that comment of looking at the balance of risks? One is that obviously a parent feels very much in control when they have their child in the car, but it's not necessarily safer.
Yeah, maybe I can start with a high level, and Pamela can fill in some of the details. So yeah, some of the work that we did was to look at injury rates, and so just so everybody understands, in most developed countries, injuries are the leading cause of death for kids. But as you had pointed out, Louise, the main source of injury deaths are kids in cars, kids as passengers in cars. And so we saw some really wonderful improvements in terms of injury rates in the 70s and 80s, as we saw things like seatbelts coming in and so on. And so there's an important role for policy and programs around keeping kids safe. When we look at play-related injuries, it's quite striking how we can say disproportionate the concern around them has been compared to the injury statistics. So I looked across all Canadian injury data from Statistics Canada, and they have data from 2000 to 2022 for falls from trees, for example. And across that entire time span, there hasn't been a single injury death to kids for falls from trees. They have similarly data from 2007 to 2022 for falls from play equipment. And in that entire time span, there's been 2 deaths from falls for kids. If you compare that to, and I don't have the stats handy, so I'll have to rely roughly on my memory, but Pamela, do you know kind of the rough death rate for children, car passengers in kind of annually to compare?
I'd have to look that up, but it's much higher, obviously, than that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, as I recall, over the same time span of the 22 years of that, looking across for falls from trees, we're looking at well over 300 deaths for kids as car passengers. And so it really is quite striking in terms of, we unthinkingly, and in fact, in some cases, we think we're doing the safer thing by putting our kids in cars and kind of taking them from this supervised activity to that supervised activity without realizing that, in fact, that is the leading cause of death, and that, if anything, we're putting them at greater risk.
It's not even just about the risk of injury. It's what are the long-term risks that a child is exposed to if they're being shuttled from one activity to another, right? They're likely going to be less active. They're not developing that sense of what their connection to other community members. There's going to be a higher chance of them on for longer if they're going to be in a car. So what are the risks of them? The risks of them being online is from small pieces of developing nearsightedness to all the way of cyberbullying. There's risks everywhere, right? It's sort of a balance of what are you exposing your child to, and what are you willing to where is that balance there? What are the benefits that we can sort of get from maybe giving children a little bit more independence? Emilie, I see you've muted. You've unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add to Mariana's comments, because another thing, we can compare risk from play to other injury types, but something that is perhaps more similar, and that I often discuss with parents, is how we accept, in Canada at least, structured sports or type of play, and children engaging in hockey, soccer, there is a risk of injury for sure, and parents are aware of it and feel comfortable with it because they understand quite easily all the benefits for their children to be active, to be a part of a team. So this is a bit what we need to do with risky play, because risky play is associated, I think, with a lot of free play. And it seems like the perception of risk in the context of free play is really different. And, you know, perhaps like Mariana said at the beginning, because parents do not feel in control of the environment of their child. But when you compare the risk of injury, the risk of injury with risky play is quite low compared to, you know, all the risk from hockey, for example. So that's an interesting discussion to have with parents, I think. And as for your other question, this is one of the most fascinating thing from risky play, I find, is all the unintended consequences of limiting kids' activities because of the fear of risk. So we are so grateful now for all these research for over 20 years that we're able to show how you know, risky play helps kids being more active. A lot of benefits also around mental health. So you know, more confidence, self-esteem, better peer relationships. So these are very, very important things to consider for the general wealth and well-being and health of children. And I think this is not something in Canada that we are that we do easily, and that we need to think about.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I always, when I'm thinking about risky play, I mean, one of the first things that I reflected on when I started learning more about this topic a few years ago was that, if anything, it feels like a sense of relief, because it feels like you don't need to put a child in every activity. You know, you don't need to watch a child every moment of every time. There are actually a number of benefits from letting go a little bit, and you know, letting the child lead the way. Any reflections on that from the group?
Well, this is something that we've heard a lot with this statement. So not only parents, but you know, educators, teachers in schools saying, wow, okay, now I feel better because I think it provides a space to say, well, here are all the benefits. And a lot of parents come to us and say, well, I never said that to anyone, but you know, my 3-year-old is always jumping from our sofa, and you know, I felt bad about that, but now I know that, you know, it's not that wrong. And so all these kind of discussions that open up with this statement, I feel, and same in schools, you know, teachers talking between them, like I think we see more and more a way of you know, people are more aware of, perhaps we should change the rules. You know, they feel like it's perhaps more safe to say what they observe and what they think around, you know, the unintended consequences that we were talking about of restricting kids during you know, recess and outdoors.
I guess I would add to that, one of the really interesting things that we've uncovered in the course of our work in this area is parenting trends, right? And how they influence and how they have influenced, you know. So as you alluded to, Louise, we've seen a kind of a reduction in risk. So we have this term risky play for play that just used to be play, and now we have to kind of identify it and label it and study it, as we academics love to do. So why? What happened? And there's many reasons for the change, but one of the big ones is a changing parenting norms. And so, you know, we're looking at kind of the late 80s, where there was a move towards intensive parenting, where there was the expectation that parents be more involved in their children's lives, in, you know, getting them in structured activities, making sure that they were enriching their brains and those sorts of things. And some of the reasons that happened was because there was a series of recessions. So there was increasing inequities in society. And so parents were realizing, that their child had to kind of, have more education or do more to have a similar kind of lifestyle that they may have been able to have with less level of education. And that's just intensified over time and intensified also with social media and parents, kind of showing, this kind of sense of what good parenting looks like that's been proliferated. So this is a very high resource intensive parenting approach. It requires, so if we look at the amount of time that parents spend parenting across time, it's actually never been higher than it is now, even though we have more and more people where, we have dual income families and women working full time and so on, and yet they're spending more time parenting. And so that's going to create a huge strain on parents, plus the cost of putting their kids in activities and the time to take them back and forth and all of that. So, and interestingly, while this, grew out of a kind of a white middle class approach, it's a recent research has shown that in fact it's quite prevalent across society, so that even people from other cultural backgrounds, other socioeconomic studies are still being measured around this kind of good parenting model. And so that's not helpful to parents or to kids. And, and I think what this risky play literature in the CPS statement shows so well is the costs of that approach and hopefully the relief for parents around, that in fact they can think about what they most value for their child and for what they want for their child, and to be able to kind of, realize that they need to give more agency back to their child, to trust their child, to create a situation where, the child is held up as capable and competent rather than as someone who's incapable, in need of care, and needs to be micromanaged from every part. So, I mean, I often wonder if my research is kind of a justification for my lackadaisical parenting, but it works.
Hey, your kids turned out all right. If I could just add to that, I think at the same time, like from the injury standpoint, is we saw this huge movement around stranger danger and the fear of your child being abducted, which when you look back at the stats it does happen, not to downplay the cases where it is so small though, compared to the magnitude of the impact that it has had. And so we saw parents being more afraid of letting their children go to the playground or go out to play by themselves, and feeling like they needed to protect their kids. And even those who knew cognitively that was not a big threat to them, in their heart of hearts, if even that was a small percentage of a chance, they just felt like they should, protect their kids and drive them wherever they were going and not let them go out and do the type of play that we used to do, go out and come back when the streetlights come on kind of thing. And so I think I think that was a combination of movements that, created this perfect storm of this fear of either being judged by other parents or this fear of a stranger abduction that outweighed the risk of all of these benefits around play.
Yeah, great points. There was also I remember hearing, Mariana, apologies, I keep picking on you, but the movement towards an elimination of all risk, right? There was with better computing power, we had better access to data, and suddenly epidemiologists were becoming a thing that were moving into the injury prevention space, and that was also impacting how not just parents but also academics and scientists were looking towards injury. This is less of a parent question, but more like the scientists in the room, I'm sure, would be curious to hear a little bit more about that approach and of removing all risk, and now we're sort of shifting towards actually, is that actually the approach? Because that's the title of today's webinar, right? Keeping kids as safe as possible is not as safe as necessary is sort of the thing that is the goal here.
Yeah, I mean, it's complex in terms of kind of the societal soup that led to the situation where we are now, and you know, and Pamela also pointed out the kidnapping fears and so on. I don't know if many of you remember in Canada and the US, the milk cartons had pictures of kids who had been kidnapped, you know, or lost on them, and that kind of, so every morning as you're having your cereal, you have the sense that this is happening kind of across the country, and then you get into the media and how much that's proliferated. But one of the things that you're pointing to, Louise, is the role of public health in this kind of shift. And what we saw in the 50s is that thankfully communicable diseases became less of a killer of kids, right? So that's wonderful. We had advances in TB and polio and so on. And so then injuries, because these other went down, injuries went up. And at the same time, you see more and more cars on the road. So you see, you know, that injuries are going up as a result of cars, you know, and prior to kind of some of the safety efforts that were taken there. And so there was a kind of a wholesale shift around injury prevention becoming a more prominent public health approach. But when you're just kind of looking at stats, without thinking about child development, you can very quickly get tunnel vision, right? And so if we look at the hospitalization statistics for kids, for all ages, falls are the leading cause of injury-related hospitalization. And for kids in particular, it's falls from playgrounds. And so if you're an epidemiologist and you're looking at stats, you're like, okay, playgrounds are a problem. We need to deal with them. But when you start digging into those stats, what you see is, in fact, you know, the rates are not that high. And if you think about kind of, you know, Suzanne and Emilie talked about the kinds of injuries, they're saying we're not looking at serious injuries. So there was a disproportionate kind of extreme move towards limiting playground injuries that may have gone too far. And so the approach in injury prevention has kind of shifted over time from, as you say, as safe as possible. We're trying to prevent every single injury, even if minor, just in case, to and as safe as necessary, recognizing that we need a balance with risk.
Yeah, just to build on that, Marianne, I pulled up the stats for the last cost of injury report, and under deaths in the 0 to 14, but when you look at the younger ages, falls, a death, there was one death in the 10 to 14 year range. 0 to 9, there were none. But when you go down to the ED visits, as Suzanne and Emilie can attest to, there's almost 298,000 fall ED visits. Part of those will be, playgrounds. So you see much more like that pyramid. Typical injury pyramid is you get the fewest deaths, the largest, sort of hospitalizations and emergency room visits. So, in those, as Suzanne said, is, they're not fatal. They're more what we would call less serious. I mean, parents, as you said, Suzanne, a broken bone, a fracture that needs surgery is a big deal in their worlds, right? So.
And I think that those injuries become more tolerable if you recognize the importance and the benefit that risky play offers. Because I do feel, as a parent myself, raising kids who are now teenagers, that perspective has been lost to some degree. Like, where there just hasn't been a focus. It's like Emilie talked about, structured activities, teamwork, academia, all of that stuff has been really pronounced in this last period of time as important for your kids. And I think as people start to understand and refocus and understand again how important those benefits from children developing confidence and independence and being competent within society as children, not needing to be so structured or so supervised and protected, that will change. And that tolerance for those kinds of injuries will change when they recognize the payoff is actually far greater in the long term. And I think some of that has been lost.
Mm-hmm.
And also to add, I wonder, and this is more of a question than an affirmation, but I wonder if by introducing this kind of balance, are we able to make sure that for the very strong recommendation where there's clearly a hazard, and it should be clear that it's dangerous for children, are we able with risky play to say, well, there needs to be a balance, and all injuries are not that bad. However, for this type of injury of this particular situation, then you should really, really be careful. I wonder if from a public perspective, people will be more willing to follow some recommendations that are out there. But it's a question. I don't know if there's any literature on that.
I guess when I think about that, I mean, wearing a bike helmet onto a playground with structures is very dangerous. It's a strangulation hazard. So that's a very clear one that we can say. And, the spaces in the bars of the play structures. Beyond that, I mean, Mariana, I don't know that there are, I mean, if you're falling onto concrete or asphalt, that's also an issue. But those are the ones that jump to my mind that are so clear cut. I mean, other than, I think it's a little more challenging, but it would be nice to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. As we pointed out earlier, it depends so much on the child's skill and experience. I guess the other one where there's, you really need to pay more attention is around play around water, because water can be so potentially dangerous. So, really thinking carefully as kind of the responsible adult around, doing the risk-benefit assessment, the risks and the hazards that might be there, and how you can also involve the children themselves in the conversations to manage the hazards, and to come up with the directions around, hey, how are we going to manage our play in this area? It's all, very doable, and there's lots of great examples of how it can be done well.
Your question, though, Emilie, brings up that kind of litigation side of that the law wants it, or the insurance, that was a big part of the original position statement, was that there are systems in place in certain environments, like at schools and daycares and things like that, that dictate some of the restrictions in a way that isn't promoting risky play, because they're concerned about, having cases and being sued and those types of things, which or even having social services called on them if they're if they're parenting, if they're let out in the backyard too long by themselves, that type of thing. So I think that also gets into the mix of how black and white can we make some of these scenarios that make it either risky or hazard, and then who is responsible for that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pam. And I know that, that's always the conversation. That's always where that conversation then leads to, right? Is that for one parent who lets their child become a little bit more free and walk to the park on their own, maybe there would be no consequences to them, and they're, seen as being this, parent that's read up on the CPS statement, and they're informed, and look at them being a good parent. And for other parents, that there's a difference in equity there. They may be worried about Child Protective Services calling on them because they're suddenly being a neglectful parent. So recognizing this is not something that is on parents solely, right? This is a whole of society thing that we need to start shifting the pendulum on. But I think, this position statement really, to me at least, feels like it is a shift of the pendulum in the direction that we want to be going. And so apologies if you can hear a bit of background. There's both a thunderstorm happening and some kids coming in from outside from some outdoor risky play behind me. So a bit of background noise. But I think I'd love to hear from Emilie and Suzanne about, this came specifically from the Canadian Paediatric Society. What do you feel that, why did you feel it was important to hear pediatricians' voices and their opinions on this issue and actually put together this position statement, not just as a commentary, but as a specific thing that was coming from pediatricians?
Well, I can start, Emilie, maybe, and then you take over. I think that we mentioned it a little bit, but I think that the work that has already been done is so compelling, and we have such a direct route towards children and their families, that we kind of saw it as our responsibility to put this work out there. And, to be honest, in academia and in clinical work, we're still a little siloed. So not all pediatricians are aware of the work that's being done within, play, and so I think that it was important for us to take a national organization like the Canadian Paediatric Society, which we're a part of, and use that platform to really disseminate this message. This very, very important work, with profound implications for how our kids are growing up and their potential and so forth. So I would just say that we felt the evidence was compelling, we felt the work was compelling, and we felt that we had a platform and an important audience that could benefit from hearing it. In the publications that they read, just to bring this information to them, where they're going to see it. So, and to parents, and the media actually became very interested in this as well. So it's become quite a good KT document, so forth. But that's, I think, the main gist from my perspective as to why we did it. But Emilie, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I would add that, the idea, I think, was to, as we just discussed, like, this is really great. It's not all that black and white. And so I guess the idea was to show all the benefits that we don't think about when we just look at the injury prevention view. And this is also, I guess, why it may look at first like a little bit weird that the injury prevention committee would write such a piece. But at the same time, this is exactly the idea of, taking the child in, with its general health and well-being, and, being really mindful of everything else in his life. So physical health, mental health, that's all very, very important, not only just injury prevention. And I think this document might be well used, by schools and daycares and municipalities, with, whenever a lawsuit or something would come up, just to show that it's all not black or white, and there's a lot of gray. So the context matters, and hopefully that will be helpful for that. So yeah.
If I could also add, I think it's credible, and if the physicians and pediatricians, they are trusted by parents and families, and so we wanted them to have the most up-to-date, credible information, because they're the messengers to a lot of these families. And so to get that kind of information, I mean, they may have heard it other places, but if they're hearing it from their physicians or they're reading it from the Canadian Paediatric Society, that just adds that level of credibility and, oh, I need to pay attention to this.
Emilie, you've spoken a little bit to this point already, but how do you see this statement being used, and how do you think it will help move maybe that pendulum, that mindset forward?
Yeah, so hopefully it continues the dialogue that we saw, and I hope that parents, schools, daycares, everybody that gravitate around a child will, you know, read that. I know that Mariana's is doing work also with grandparents. I think that's fantastic. It's really needed. So, you know, really everybody around the child should be aware of risky play and try to integrate it in their life as much as they can. And again, acknowledging that not everyone is at the same you know, step of the process, but hopefully we will get further on this path.
Suzanne, maybe the same question to you. Again, apologies for the background noise, but how did you, when you were putting this together, how did you envision it being used, and what did you hope, how did you hope it would be used moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think Emilie answered that really well. I think that the statement in and of itself is used, I think, for the larger kind of pediatric healthcare community, for currently practicing pediatricians, family physicians, nurse practitioners, like whoever is looking after children in some capacity, usually has access to this type of document. They're also used very importantly as study tools for like up and coming pediatricians, residents, trainees, and so they hold some, they carry some impact in terms of training future generations to be thinking along this line as well. So, excuse me. So I think it was, you know, helpful to consider that that it's going to be also be, you know, have some longevity in terms of how current residents and training medical students and so forth are going to be looking at this issue as well, and knowing that it's an important issue and that the positive benefits of risky play and the ability to assess and manage risk for children is just as important as anything else that they're reading within our position statements. So that's one of the reasons, or one of the ways I envision the document being used within kind of our medical group. Then I think the way, you know, it has been so disseminated through media, I think has been really, really important for public awareness as well. And, you know, I think our document really is a summary. We have the, you know, the opportunity to write this, but it's really a reflection and endorsement of all the enormous amount of work that has been done. And we're just helping to spread that word so that it gets out there. That's really, I guess, how I see the document being useful now and in the future.
I think there's also the aspect around advocating for change in policies and regulations and things like that. Mariana, you can probably speak to some specific examples, but that for some an organization like Parachute, we would be looking at this statement to reference if we were looking to support communities who are going to change, or organizations that were going to change their policies around, you know, preventing injuries, but also allowing this play. So I think there's multiple levels of use for the statement.
Yeah, maybe as a concrete example, certainly when the 2015 statement was released, within a few months, it was used in a BC Supreme Court case, which dismissed a playground injury lawsuit. And that was for a position statement that wasn't from as recognized a body and didn't go nearly as far or have as much research evidence, you know, an additional 8 years of research evidence in this one. So I'm really quite excited to see what emerges over, you know, the coming months and years around this.
And I think too, thinking about its impact more broadly. I know there was a comment in the chat about whether or not a similar position statement was being developed in the US, and it doesn't seem, not that I'm aware of, but you know, hopefully this is a good nudge to our neighbors to the south that, you know, here's the evidence. The evidence has been around for a long time. It's robust, it's compelling, and it's something that we think you should also be looking to and promoting. So
there was another question in the chat, sorry, related to the US context, which I think is worth addressing. So, you know, we are kind of in regular contact with our US, some of our US compatriots, and Tony, lovely to see you on the line. So Let Grow is an organization in the US that's actually doing quite a bit of work in this area. And the question in the chat was around laws that make it illegal, you know, for kids to be unsupervised outside. And what Let Grow has managed to do in the US is, I think they now have 8 states that have passed what they call free range parenting laws, where, you know, social services can't be called and parents can't be seen as kind of irresponsible or not providing sufficient supervision because their kids are outside supervised. So I think there's exciting things happening in all sorts of parts of the world. It's going to look different depending on the context for that country and region.
yeah, thank you for that, Mariana. My next question across all panelists, I think, is within this statement, maybe more broadly, what change do you hope to see in the future as it relates to risky outdoor play or children's health, well-being, children's play?
Yeah, I'll
Mariana,
get started, I guess. Yeah. You know, I've been working on this kind of research for over a decade now, and my experience has been, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 steps back, but the trajectory is forward. And it's really, you know, exciting to see that. And then you get massive boosts like this position statement that just make you feel like all the toil and hard work and teeth gnashing is so worth it, because things like this can happen. But really, you know, I want a vision where we have equity in access to risky play. So one of the things that we haven't talked about here is, of course, that it's, you know, there's a lot of research to show that there is an equity of access, that, you know, that kids have easier access to green space or to, you know, childcare or schools that prioritize this. And that, of course, tends to be higher income kids. So we want to make sure that we are giving kids access to this in the places where they spend their time, so that it's not just on parents to, you know, find yet another way, you know, of trying to give kids experiences they need, right? It's really not about that. It's about giving kids freedom and about providing these experiences in places where they spend their time. So schools and childcare. And so we're doing a lot more work in these areas to be able to increase equity of access so that every kid, every day, can have these experiences and experience the wonderful aspects of it that we know are so important for so many aspects of their child health and development. So that's my vision, that we're not even talking about this in 10 years. We're like, I don't know what happened with those people way back when, but, you know, thankfully we came to our senses.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Mariana. I mean, I think it's you know, that we don't have to have conversations like this about what is risky play, what is, and that the balance comes back, because I think, as you said, Louise, the pendulum kind of was at the one end. It's now, I'd like it to swing back even a little bit more, from back to the middle, even back more, and that, you know, parents and people who have responsibility for the environments that children play in or interact in, schools and daycares and things like that, can see that balance and take a bit of a breath and understand the whole spectrum. Because, as we talked about earlier, you know, these silos of injury and play and cognitive or like mental health, it's the whole person. You have to approach the child as the whole person, and what is the best from a developmental stage to position them for resilience, for, you know, social interaction, and for the best possible start in life. And play is so big, such a big part of that, that it needs to have that priority.
Emilie or Suzanne?
Yeah, sure. I agree with all of that. I think the equity is so important. There's a question in the chat about has there been any research about risky play with children with disabilities? And we did include that within our statement as well, because there has been, and there's, you know, positive effects on children with disabilities as well. And I think the equity around access to this type of play, and equity around all kids, regardless of, you know, background, ethnicity, developmental stage, neurotypical, you know, like all of the equity, I think that, you know, that we that this conversation advances over the research that's being done, and will be done, I think is going to be really, really important. I think keeping an eye on the important differences, ensuring that as the conversation progresses, people are aware of hazards, and ensuring that that doesn't slip back. And we know what risky play is not. And so that as gray as it is in some areas, that the places where it's not gray, that we move that forward, and that we're clear around that, like, you know, not ignoring evidence-based safety measures and hazards and so forth, which I think will happen organically, if we, you know, with the people involved, that this will be positive and forward and not slip back like that. But I think that's an important thing to keep an eye on. Yeah, I don't know. I think the equity probably is the biggest piece that has already been mentioned. So
yeah, and to add, I look forward also to hearing more Indigenous voices, you know, on risky play. So I think this is ongoing, but I really look forward to having, you know, like a lot of documents and discussions with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples here in Canada about what their perspective is on risky play and how to best include it in their children's life.
Yeah, Emilie, that's a great point. You're reminding me, I was on a call with a few colleagues, including a couple of Indigenous colleagues, and we were talking about how to bring infants outdoors in the winter and how to do that safely. And someone said, oh, you know, we just don't have enough data on that. And my Indigenous colleague piped up and said, well, actually, the Inuit have been doing this safely, you know, for generations. And so there's a lot of, I think, rich information and knowledge that can be shared moving forward in a beautiful way, also for potentially truth and reconciliation. So lots of ways of, lots of benefits there, I think. A big silver lining, I think, of all of this work moving forward. I'm recognizing that we're over 70 minutes, so you know, we can keep talking, but I know attention spans can be short. In our last few minutes together, I think we have addressed most questions in the chat as we've been moving forward, but I encourage, if there are any additional questions that we don't get to, you're welcome to maybe even email Outdoor Play Canada. I can put that in the chat. We can add that to the links at the end. But to the group, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would love to bring up to sort of get on your podium and share with the group?
I think it's worth kind of emphasizing, which has been touched on kind of throughout, but is how this really is a whole of society approach. So it's not just a, you know, parents need to do this or pediatricians need to do this or so on. You know, over the years, we've been talking to insurance, legislators, municipal planners in terms of how cities are designed to support, you know, kids just being able to go out. There's, you know, there's some neighborhoods where this is not, you know, a reasonable thing to do because the neighborhood's not set up that way. And so, you know, these kinds of conversations, and each of us on this call and who listen to this, to then recognize our role in taking those conversations beyond to the many layers of society that need to get involved to actually make a difference for kids, so that we're not having to have this conversation in a few years, so that it's natural for kids to be seen in all parts of our cities, to be engaging in the kinds of activities that they want to engage in, and feeling like they have they're part of society, they have a role in society, and they're a valued member of society. So just kind of emphasizing that we all have our role to play in that.
Mariana, I love that you brought that up. I always think about that TV show from Japan where small toddlers are being sent out to run errands. And they wouldn't be able to do that, cross busy roads and go to a grocery store and interact with the employees there in a safe manner if there wasn't sort of a full community and societal buy-in to it's okay to let a child learn how to cross the street on their own, count dollars, pick up a bunch of bananas and bring that home to their parent. Pam, I see that you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I totally agree with the societal, and I think it makes it brings up the importance of this for all ages. The work that we do spans the lifespan, and we know that when kids are active and playing, and they form those habits and they continue those into adulthood, it actually helps them as they grow older to maintain that activity, and to maintaining your mobility in your older years is essential. It's one of the key things of fall prevention in older adults. And so while we think about it as a childhood thing, if it becomes something that is a habit throughout your life to be active and to engage in all kinds of activities, whether that's formal or informal, or just walking or biking to the store, if we have environments that support all of that activity, it actually helps us in a number of different ways and across all ages.
Emilie or Sue, any final thoughts from you? Don't jump in all.
No, I think it's been said. Yeah. I don't have anything.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation and to promote this position statement. It's been such a valuable learning opportunity for me as we've gone through this, and so it's lovely to. I can't imagine being on an international call like this with people so interested in this, and so thank you.
And thank you for leading the charge on this. It was a very exciting day when that position statement came out. So that there are a lot of us in this risky play world that are celebrating on the regular.